Perfect. So let's just prove that we're rolling here. We're ready to start. So for my class, I've had them take a look at the requirements here, where in the first phase you're creating stock. The stock should belong to an industry. It should have a symbol. It should start with a random price. These things should be generated randomly. The last time we were able to start with a random price. This time we'll work on the industry. So each stock will create a random industry when it's created. We'll craft a buyer with a budget, a name, and a portfolio. And we're going to get into the idea of portfolio very soon, but it will require us to use a couple of new programming concepts. And before we get there, I want to go over the fundamentals a little bit more. And then we'll add a random number of stock to the portfolio, subtracting the price of the transaction from his or her budget when it makes a buy. And then a transaction is present to handle the information on the trade, who bought what for, and how much is saved. And that'll be what we handle in our first introduction. That will cover 95% of the Java language, just doing all that. And so it's designed to cover a lot of the bases in this class. So by doing this first bit, you're really learning almost all the skills that you need. And what you really need after these technical skills are introduced is a little bit of skill in terms of architecture and building things that match expectations. So let's get into Eclipse a bit, and let's try to do an industry. So the stock does in fact have an industry, and this needs to be defined randomly. So probably instead of there being an industry that's predefined, probably we'll need to create a function where the industry is going to be called setIndustry. Now that will work because I can go here to the red and I can say, okay, go ahead and create a method called setIndustry. That's fine. And let's back up a little bit, because we can also do something that's quite different. Now you notice that each of these member variables are public, and that enables us to do things like this. System.out.println L dot industry. And the reason why I can do this is because industry has a public qualifier right there. It's defined as a public variable. Now, what if I were to create industry instead as a private? Now, something quite different would happen right here, because then I couldn't, this wouldn't work. It'd say, well, industry, I can't see what the value of industry is. And yeah, that's by design because I've made it private. So what I can do though is it gives me that warning, but it then says, well, hey, would you like to create a getter and a setter? So what you do is you create getter and setter. Now what that's going to do, and you double click that, it's going to actually, and you can put these two new methods wherever you want. So I'm going to make that as right after set stock price. So I'm going to put it right at the very end. And it's actually going to create, if I move down to the very bottom, get industry and set industry. And those are two methods that will set the type of industry that the stock is in. And then if I ever want to get the industry, I'll just run this. Now you notice that get industry is public and set industry is also public. So if I wanted to say L.getIndustry, that'll work out just fine. So if I say get industry, that'll be very legal, and that will return the name of the stock's industry. All right, so that's all working out okay. And let's see if that's a L.getIndustry. Is that a problem? So let's go ahead and we'll just comment this out for now, because that's just some extra stuff we can work on later. But right now I want to take a look at get industry and set industry. Now one of the cool things about set industry is it sets the value of industry right then and there. So if we were to call that from within the constructor, we can set the stock price, then we can say set industry. Now, one of the things, and you notice it gives me a problem here because I'm not providing anything inside the parentheses. And you realize that I need to provide something within these parentheses because it's expecting a string as an input parameter. And this is what I wanted to take this lecture to talk about, because you guys are familiar with public and private. You're familiar with the return type, right? This is a string, and I'm returning a string. But we haven't talked about input parameters. So what I want to say is the input parameter is always going to take place between the parentheses. There can be multiple arguments. And what I'm going to do right here, just to demonstrate how this works, and you should always use your print lines as a valuable way to inspect the values inside of your program. We'll say my industry is industry, and word 1 is word 1, and word 2 is word 2. And I just want to establish that little experiment because right now this set industry function requires 3 strings or words to be inserted in order for it to work. So you realize that this is now a little bit broken, and we could add some arguments to kind of put it together. But I'm going to say my first word is going to be word 1, exclamation point, and then my second one is going to be word in quotations word 2. And so that should work right there. And so let's go ahead and activate this demo. And let me say this. Because I'm calling for a new stock right here, it's going to call the constructor right here. And then by virtue of calling the constructor, it's going to activate set industry right there. And then because we're going to call set industry, it's going to verbalize, what that industry is. So here's a few new concepts. One is this notion of input parameters and the fact that we can kind of design functions according to what we want to make happen. Let's go ahead and give that a try. So the industry is fishing, and that comes from the parameters that we set here. It's fishing. And then word 1 is word 1, and then word 2 is word 2, and we have a new price, and we can run it one more time. You notice the price is still randomizing. Okay, so that's all good right there. Now the truth of it is we don't need these 2 additional parameters when we define the industry. We only need to define the industry using 1 input parameter. But the truth of it is we don't need input parameters at all when we set our industry. And here's why. And we'll just kind of, we want to actually create a new random, which is R. We'll create a new random right there. Then I want to set up a condition where integer L is going to be r.nextInt. And what we're doing is we're going to use the value of L to determine which industry stock belongs to. Okay, so we're going to say if, and what we ought to do is we should kind of demonstrate to ourselves what that random value is going to be. And let's go ahead and run that for ourselves. And we hope this warning won't stick in our way. But there's one thing I need to fix right here where I'm going to delete these additional parameters, and that should fix that warning. Set industry for fishing, and it looks like we're going to eliminate that parameter in general, because we want to be able to create a simulation that actually has a little bit of built-in intelligence, or at least it feels like it has some built-in intelligence, and it's built in with some random life of its own. And that's our motivation for using a random number, is because things happen like in nature. They happen randomly. They happen of their own accord, automatically almost. So let's go ahead and test that random number. The value of L here will be this big kind of number. So that's about the scale of the number. And you can see that number is randomizing, as well as the price and the IPO quantity. So there's a lot of good randomness that's happening behind the scenes here. And we can comment that out because that is looking legit. And the number here is going to look like this. That's going to be 3, 6, 10 characters. So what we could do is we could say L is equal to itself divided by 10,000. And why don't we go ahead and print that new value out, because there's no sense in dealing with a number that big. And let's see what that L value is. So that L value is getting smaller. Why don't we just shrink it down by another 2 orders of magnitude? And so it's getting nice and small, and maybe just one more 0. Now I could either do this, or I could set a boundary for next int by, say, 100, like that. And that might be more attractive to you guys, where that's fine. Now what's kind of cool here is, let's say, now here's where I want to do a few if-thens. Or if say if the value of L is less than 10, this dot industry is equal to fishing. Now fishing is an industry, guys, just because you're from SoCal. There are these things called fishing nets, and you fish with them. Else if, what's that? I fish. I know what fishing is. I see you. Okay, all right. L, let's say if L is less than 10, it's fishing. But if L is less than 20, and L is greater than 10, so to trap it sort of between there, maybe this industry is going to be equal to telecom. And then why don't we put a base case where we say, otherwise, if none of that matches, this dot industry is going to be equal to the education industry. Everybody goes back to school if they can't decide to be an industry. And so I can either, I don't need to return this, so this becomes superfluous. But this industry is going to get defined by this activity here. And then why don't we kind of prove what the new industry is right up top here within the constructor. Doing a lot of proof is going to be a really good thing for you guys. System that out. And why don't we just go back to main, right? Now industry as a variable is private, but what about get industry? Get industry will return the industry. So we can go back here to main and say, okay, system that out, print line. Industry of stock is set to L dot get the industry, okay? And that should do nicely for us. So let's go. I know I'm moving fast, but that's what YouTube's all about. YouTube's just about, trying to communicate quickly. And so it looks like the industry is education. Okay, it's reading that random. Let's do it a few more times. Still education, still in school. Oh, there was a telecom. Okay, so there are, it is throwing, telecom, okay. Great, so that's doing some good things. Now, what if I were to say to you guys that your stock should be a member of 25 major industries? You guys could do that. So I think a good project will represent 20 different industries, right? Because what if we had 6,000 stocks and you said, hey, I want to buy a bucket of stocks that contain one stock from telecom, one stock from railroads, one stock from mining, and another for oil and gas exploration. You should be able to dial that up and create a portfolio that way. So having that little string of industry attached could be valuable to you. So here, once you have all these testing done, you can actually erase that. You don't need to use my commenting is pretty profuse. So if you no longer need it, you can clean things up a little bit by taking that out. I really like system.out to log things to the console as I'm building, and because you guys should never take stuff on whole. Just take little nibbles. And if you can get 2 lines right at a time, you're gonna make software. It's really hard to get 4 lines right. Try to get 2 lines right. And if you're walking really conservatively, you're gonna get software made. I promise you. You don't need to be a genius. You just need to be smart. There's a difference. Okay? So why don't we try that and get yourself a stock that has an industry, and let's do a full printout. Industry, price of stock. IPO quantity is going to be L.IPO quantity. Cool. And then what else can we determine? Is that about all? I guess that's all. Now we got to figure out a symbol. But we're going to need to have an iterator. We're going to have some for looping to create a random symbol. That'll come in the next stage. But if you can hang with this, then you can make a nice determination as to industry. So let's make that. Let's get that kind of going. L.IPO quantity. What did I do wrong? Did I misspell it? Oh, thank you. Good job. My students are bright. So industry of stock is education, price, IPO quantity, price is now, price of stock, IPO quantity is now. Okay, great. Here, let's run that a few more times. You can see that the price is kind of duplicated in 2 places. Print price and IPO quantity. I could probably deprecate that. And so it's starting to take shape. So you have the ability to generate one stock. Now I promise you that you'll be able to create a stock market with thousands of stocks very soon, very, very soon. But you'll need to model one stock perfectly before the stock market will take shape and it will be satisfying. Does that make sense? So focus on that micro goal, and yeah, let's leave that for now. Why don't you go ahead and work on that.